today. Today we're going to be doing the assessment, the Framboise Ganache Tart, which is also known as a raspberry ganache tart. Framboise is a French word for raspberry. So knowing that, let's get started. I have my sanitation solution for good sanitation practices. I have my bucket and my spray bottle. So I'm going to move these out of my way under the table. I used this to clean my area before I started setting up all my mise en place, and I'm going to use it at the end for my cleanup. So be mindful of this and make sure that you have this in your assessment pictures because we are looking for that. So knowing that, we're going to get started. I have all of my mise en place out. Today we're going to be making a tart dough, which is a Pate A Foncer, and it's just a sweet short dough for the base of the tart, and then we'll fill that with some raspberries, and we're going to make a ganache, and then we'll be decorating it with whipped cream and plating it up. So we have a lot to do, and I have a lot of mise en place today, so let's get started. So first of all, I'm going to start on the dough, the Pate A Foncer, and I'm going to sift my flour, which is just stated as flour in the recipe, so it's going to be our all-purpose flour. So I'm going to sift my flour like we always do to make sure there's no lumps in it. And I have my butter at room temperature, and my butter I'm just going to be cutting into my flour, so I cut my butter into smaller pieces to kind of speed up that process and help it out a little bit. So you can make this mixture easily by hand, but since we're doing a live cast and we have a lot of things to cover, I'm going to make it on the machine, and that's fine too. You just have to be careful and keep a real close eye on it. So I'm going to put my flour in my bowl, and I like to sift my flour onto these parchments, and you could do it into a bowl, but I'm just really used to doing it like that. It works out better for me, and I can pick up my parchment and just dump it in. This is my butter, which I put into small cubes, and it's at room temperature. And I'm going to mix that with my flour, and I'm going to help it out in the beginning before I put it on the machine with my hand. I'm just kind of breaking it up, and we're just coating the butter with the flour here, and we're just trying to get the gluten strands going, and this is going to make some flakiness in our dough. So I'm just helping it out with my hand a little bit, and I was just kind of using my hand like this as almost like a little claw tool. So I'm going to start this on my machine with my paddle attachment. So I like to use the paddle for my doughs, this way I don't damage my whisk. And we're just going to mix this until it's crumbly. So you're going to want to keep an eye on it and keep it kind of low. And just mix it till it's crumbly. You don't want to cream it. You're just coating your butter pieces with flour. Then we're going to add our sugar and our lemon zest. And my lemon zest, I grated it with a microplaner, and I have some nice really fine pieces. And you can chop it up too, or use a thicker zester, but I like to use the microplaner. So our butter is getting broken up, and we're going to wait until it gets kind of in smaller pieces, kind of almost mealy looking. And then we're going to add our sugar and our lemon zest. Just keep a real close eye on this when you're doing this on the mixer. Don't walk away from it. Just want it to be kind of crumbly in texture. So I'm going to go ahead and add my sugar now that my butter pieces are covered with flour. And I'm going to add my lemon. And after we get these mixed in, then we're going to add our vanilla and our egg. We have 1 egg. And this mixture is going to seem to be a little bit dry. It's going to take a little while to come together, but just be patient with it. And as a variation to this recipe, it says in the bottom of the recipe that you can add a little bit of water, but don't be too quick to add the water. Just kind of see how it turns out. Because if you make your dough too sticky, adding more flour is not the solution to it. So I'm going to go ahead and add my egg, And then I'm going to add my vanilla too. And keep in mind that your flour is a reflection on the weather and the environment that you live in. If it's winter time and it's dry, your flour is going to be drier and you may need that extra water in it. And if it's summertime or if you're in a humid climate, you may not need to add the extra water. So knowing that, I'm going to turn on the mixer and I'm just going to keep an eye on this closely. And we have a question. Or what? The question is, can we use a Cuisinart to mix this? You can mix these doughs in Cuisinarts, but like I said, do it the same way. You're going to keep a close eye on it. You're going to make it mealy in the beginning. Don't cream the flour with the butter, and you're just coating the butter with the flour. So be careful of that. So I'm going to let this go for a little while, and it seems like it's dry, but it's just not coming together quickly. And I'm not going to mix it too much longer on the machine. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it onto the table, and I'm going to mix the rest by hand. And this way, it's not going to be overmixed on the mixer here. I kind of have some control. I'm just going to squeeze it together with my hands on the table here. And like I said, you can go ahead and add a little bit of water to it, but just be careful. Probably for a small amount of dough like this, I would only add like maybe a tablespoon of water at the most. Just be careful because you can actually make this really sticky and it's not going to be workable for you. And like I said, adding more flour is not the solution either. See how nicely this is coming together? I'm pressing it together by hand. And I'm kind of doing it in two separate pieces. And you can see the nice lemon zest in there. I'm just going to work it by hand a little bit. If you were to do this completely on the machine with the paddle, it just may overwork that gluten, and it is a pastry, and we talked about that before, about our pastry doughs, how we don't want to work the gluten too much. That's more for those bread doughs that we want that chewiness to. These doughs, we want them to stay delicate and flaky, so we're going to be mindful of how we work the gluten. So this dough, it seemed pretty dry, but it came together nicely. And like I said, you can go ahead and add that water, but just be careful with that. So the dough needs to be refrigerated for about 30 minutes before it's rolled out. So we're going to set this aside, and I made a piece earlier, and we're going to go ahead and roll that one out. And we have another question.
If we started by hand, would it be less flaky to start like the bun dough was?
The question is, if we started by hand, the dough, would it be less flaky like the bun dough was? Actually, if you're mixing it by hand, you're working the gluten less, and that's going to cause more delicacy, which means more flakiness. So mixing things by hand, you always have like a lot more control, and you're also not going to be easily over mixing them on a mixer. So this came together nicely, so I'm going to set it aside, and then we're going to go ahead and roll out the dough that I made earlier. So I made a small batch of the same dough earlier. I refrigerated it for 30 minutes, and right before the cast I pulled it out. And it's still a little cool, but we should be able to roll it out okay. With this dough, you can easily roll it out on some flour on your work surface, but be mindful not to use too much flour, and use a pastry brush to wipe off that excess flour too, not to alter the recipe. Or you can roll the dough between parchment paper, or you can roll it between saran wrap too, or wax paper will work too. It's almost the same as the parchment paper. And rolling it between these papers, it helps with the cracking. It helps eliminate some of that cracking. So I'm just pressing the dough down a little bit to get it started. And then I'm going to be rolling it out. And if you have a little problem with your parchment sliding on your work surface, you can put a little damp paper towel under it or a little piece of saran wrap. So mine seems to be okay for now. So I'm just going to roll this dough out in between the parchment. And it's a little cool, but it seems to be rolling out just fine. And then we're going to put it in our tart pan. And the tart pans don't need to be greased at all. You can just put the dough right in there. And this parchment is really helping the dough not to crack. So I have a little bit of curling up because my dough is cold, but that's okay. It's rolling out just fine. And with this recipe in particular, the dough, you're going to have a little bit extra dough. This is an exact amount for one tart. And I'm doing a 10-inch tart, so you're going to have some excess dough. So keep that in mind when you're rolling it. And I'm rolling my dough to about 1/8 of an inch thick. So you don't want it too thick. You want it to bake nicely and evenly. So you want to get it as even as you can too. And sometimes it's hard to tell with the parchment. You can pick it up every now and then and take a look and see how the dough is doing. So it's starting to come to a nice thickness. I think I need to make it a little bit thinner. So I'm going to go over it a couple more times. And then we'll be ready to put it in our tart pan. And it's really easy to get off of this parchment paper too. So this is a nice solution. So you don't have to flour your surface. And sometimes these doughs can be a little sticky too. So it's also so easy to get off of here. So I have my 10-inch tart pan. And I'm just going to take my top layer of parchment off. And then I'm just going to invert this over the pan and kind of release the dough. As you can see, we've got some excess dough. And I'm kind of just pulling my parchment off and I'm tucking it down a little bit into the corners of the pan. And if you get a few pieces that tear, it's okay, you can repair them. And I have some creasing too, that's okay, we can kind of flatten that out. No big deal. Okay, we have a question while I'm doing this.
Once the dough comes out the refrigerator, should you let it wait until it's room temperature before you roll it?
The question is, once the dough comes out of the refrigerator, should you let it get to room temperature before you roll it? No, you shouldn't, because it's only going to be resting in the refrigerator for about 30 minutes since you made it, and that's not enough time for it to get real cold. So I would say just go ahead and roll it, unless you end up leaving it in there a little bit longer, then let it kind of warm up a little bit so you can actually roll it. So now that we have our tart pan filled, like I said, I've got some creases here and I can just easily press them out. And keep in mind that this is going to be a filled tart too, so no one's going to see the bottom or the inside. And you can take your rolling pan and clean off your edges, or you can use your bench scraper or your plastic dough scraper. However you like to do it, whatever comfortable for you, or you can just actually press them with the palm of your hand, whatever you like. In the scrap dough, we have a pretty decent amount left over. You can make some little tarts with this. Just be careful not to work it too much, and you can wrap it in some plastic and let it rest in the fridge for a little bit and then roll it again. So knowing that, I'm just going to start pressing out some of these creases, and we have another question.
Do you have a preference on the rolling pin, type of rolling pin that you use?
The question is, do I have a preference on the type of rolling pin that I use? I'm accustomed to using pins with handles, so I don't use European pin a lot, the one that doesn't have handles on it, especially when I'm rolling out something that's a little harder to roll like this, and especially with my fondants. It's just part of my training and what I'm used to. So I always lean towards something with a handle, but I do like the French pins for some lighter things too, and I like to use those for breaking up my nuts and things. But it's just really what you're used to and what's most comfortable for you. I know a lot of people just really enjoy using those pins that don't have handles on it, but it's not something that I'm used to. So I've gotten a lot of the creases out of my Tart here. So I'm going to go ahead and dock it, and I'm just going to dock the bottom, and you don't have to dock this a real lot. This is going to help any steam release so you don't get any of those pockets forming from underneath. And it's not necessary to dock the sides at all either, just the bottom is fine. So we're going to be blind baking this Tart, and you can blind bake by using some weight on the inside, or if you're doing like a pie tin and you have some disposable tins, you can invert them to blind bake them like that. So I'm going to be blind baking this with some rice for a weight, and you can use parchment paper or you can use some saran wrap, and I like to use saran wrap. And I have this smaller roll, so I'm going to make a double piece here. I'm just putting 2 pieces together so I have a big enough surface. And I prefer to use this over the parchment because to me the parchment kind of dries a little bit and it bakes and sometimes it crumbles and you get some of that rice in your tart shell. But it's really whatever you like. So you can easily use the plastic wrap and it's not going to melt on you. And I kind of tuck in the edges a little bit and smooth it out. And then I'm going to fill this with some rice. And my rice for my blind baking, I save it in a container and then I just use that for all of my blind baking. So it'll get a little darker in color for you. And then I just kind of gently fold this over. And when you put these in the oven with the saran wrap, it's going to shrink up on you a little bit, but be mindful of that, and it's fine. You can just leave it, because by the time it shrinks up, the sides have already got some structure to them. So we're going to bake this for about 15 to 25 minutes, depending on your oven. The conventional ovens are taking a little bit longer, so if you're using one of those, it's probably going to take about 25 minutes. And usually when this is about halfway through, when I'm blind baking, I'll pull my weight out so the bottom of the shell can dry out and bake on its own without anything on it for a little while. And we have a question.
Can you use a pie weight instead?
Can we use a pie? The question is, can you use a pie weight instead? Yeah, if it fits the bottom of the tart shell. And the purpose of the weight is so the shell doesn't bubble up on the bottom, and also so the sides don't fall down too. So if it works like size and space-wise, I would say yes. So we're going to go ahead and put this in a 350-degree oven to bake, like I said, between 15 and probably 25 minutes. And we have another question.
Why is this called blind baking?
The question is a very good one. Well, all questions are good. Why is this called blind baking? It's just a term that's used for baking an empty shell. You're baking it without anything in it, so they use blind baking term for that. So if you hear that, then that's what you know it means. If you work for a pastry chef and he or she asks you to blind bake like 10-inch tart pans, tart shells, and pans for maybe some macadamia or white chocolate tarts, and you know what he or she means. So I baked a shell ahead of time, and I baked it a nice golden brown. And this is a really nice dough. You're going to be really happy with it. And now we're going to assemble the raspberries in the bottom. And we're putting them the whole side down. And then we're going to make a quick batch of ganache, and we're going to pour this over. You're going to pour the ganache over the tart. So this is a really nice tart. It's a nice thing to know. You can make this in a small form or in a large form and slice it like this. And this is something that you'll really use in the years to come. It's a crowd pleaser. You have chocolate and raspberry and you have a little crunch, so sure to be loved by everyone. So I'm just assembling my raspberries, and we're assembling them like this so they look nice when we cut it. You could easily just kind of throw them in, but it's nice to assemble them. When you pour the ganache over, some of them are going to become out of place, but that's okay too. And I have a little flour. And we have another question.
Shelf life of the dough. How long can we store in the refrigerator?
The question is the storage of the dough. How long can you store this dough in the refrigerator before you bake it? I would say just a few days, and if you're not going to bake it, then go ahead and freeze it. It's another one of these doughs, if you wrap it up really tight and of course label it, it'll freeze really well for you. You don't want to keep these doughs in your refrigerator for more than a few days because they may get those black spots on them. And there's also eggs in here too, so you want to be mindful of that. And I'm just taking off a little bit of flour pieces from our raspberries that are sometimes stuck on these. And these raspberries, I cleaned them and washed them carefully, and then I put them on some paper towels to dry. I just kind of gently wash them. So I'm going to go over to the stove and I'm going to start my cream for my ganache. Okay, I have the cream for the ganache on the stove, and I have the chocolate that I prepared earlier. I chopped it up in some small pieces. We're going to let our cream come to a little bit of a boil around the edges, a simmer about 140 degrees. Then we're going to pour it over our chocolate, and then we'll be ready to finish our tart. And we have another question.
Can we use foil instead of saran wrap?
The question is for the blind baking, can you use foil instead of saran wrap? Yes, you can. Anything like that, the foil, the saran wrap, or the parchment, that'll work just fine. Just be careful when you're taking it off if you have any creases. Sometimes foil can get stuck in the creases and tear easily, but the nice thing about foil is you can see it so easily if you tear a piece and you can pull it out, or if you need to use a little paring knife to chip it out, but that'll work just fine too. So knowing that, I'm going to be keeping an eye on my cream. It looks like it's starting to simmer a little bit, and I'll be going to grab it in just a minute, and I'm going to pour it over my chocolate, which I have chopped up into small pieces, and this is a couverture, and I used a 60% chocolate for this, and I used part Ghirardelli and part another 60% chocolate that I had in the kitchen. So I'm watching the cream so it doesn't boil over, starting to bubble around the edges, and I'm going to pull it off the stove in just a minute. And then we're just going to pour it over our chocolate and let it kind of steep in and start to melt on its own a little bit before we start stirring it. Because keep in mind that once we start stirring it, it's automatically cooling. You can see the steam coming out. So let's grab our cream. There we go. So like I said, we're just going to let this seep in a little bit and start to melt, and then we'll go ahead and mix it with our whisk. And we're going to be careful not to get any air bubbles in here. And I was talking about the chocolate. I used a 60% couverture, which is a really nice chocolate for this ganache. It's going to give you a nice rich chocolate flavor with a little bit of bitterness to it, but still very sweet. Not too sweet and not one of those really strong bitter flavors that you kind of have to acquire a taste for a little bit. And this ganache in particular doesn't have any butter in it, which is really typical for ganaches that you're going to be using for fillings. The butter adds a lot of shine, and also it doesn't let the ganache get too hard. If you're making a really firm ganache and you get that real chocolate feeling, the butter will help that a little bit. But as far as fillings, you're going to use mostly ganaches that are just chocolate and cream, which are fine. They're just nice like that the way they are. So knowing that, I'm going to start stirring the chocolate into the cream, and we have a question.
What kind of cream is used?
The cream that I use is just a heavy cream. And the same that we used for the assessment when you do the assessment in the beginning. So this is a nice kind of a medium firm ganache. There's all different kinds that you'll make. And this one is just going to be a little bit on the firm side because we're going to be cutting it. So I'm carefully stirring not to aerate this at all. So I don't want any air bubbles in here. And it looks like I have all of my chocolate pieces incorporated. And I'm going to take my rubber spatula just to make sure, scraping down the bowl. There's no chocolate in the bottom. Everything is well incorporated, and I didn't get any air in here. And I have a nice shine from the sugar and the chocolate and the cocoa butter and the chocolate too. So we're going to carefully pour this over our tart, and we have another question.
Can we use thick milk like hemp milk?
The question is, can we use thick milk like
Hemp milk.
hemp milk? I'm not familiar with that at all, so I really don't know. If that's what you have available to you, then maybe just try a little batch so you're not making a big batch with some expensive chocolate. But I have not used that. I always just use my heavy cream and it works fine. I'm thinking that maybe hemp milk may be part of the top of the milk that settles with the cream. So try a little batch and see if it works for you, but I can't tell you if it works or not because I've never done that. So now I'm going to be pouring my ganache over my raspberries, which are placed in the bottom of my tart shell. And I'm just going to be pouring carefully, and like I said, these raspberries may get a little bit out of place. Don't worry about that. It's kind of nice when they stand up, but if they get moved around, that's okay too. So I'm going to be scraping all this out because we're using chocolate, which is an expensive ingredient in the kitchen. So you're going to want to get all that out. If a chef walks by your pots and you're not scraping them out, he or she is not going to be happy because it's wasteful. It could drive the food cost up. So my bowl is nice and scraped out. And I'm going to be using this little offset spatula to kind of spread my ganache around, because this ganache is kind of a medium, thicker ganache, and it's not completely running into the tart. So it needs a little help being spread around. And I like to use these small tools. You could use this medium offset too, but I like to use the smaller ones. You have a little more control going around the tart. And we have another question.
Are you not adding butter to the ganache?
The question is, am I not adding butter to the ganache? And that's correct. There's no butter in this ganache recipe. This is like a medium firm ganache, and it's only made with the cream and the chocolate. And you'll find that typically in fillings for ganache, they're not going to have the butter in it because the butter is going to give it the shine which you would want to use if you were maybe coating a cake. But either one is okay to use for fillings, but these are a little more typical, the ones without the butter. I personally make almost all of my ganache without any butter in it because I just like the way that it tastes with just the cream and the chocolate. And it's easier, it's one less step. So now that we have this perfectly covered, this is going to go in the refrigerator for 2 to 4 hours. And then when you pull it out to cut it and serve it to your guests, you're going to leave it get to room temperature, maybe leave it out for like a half hour, 45 minutes. So right before the cast started, I went ahead and pulled the tart out that I made earlier so we can cut it. So as you can see, the tart is nice and set, and it lost a little bit of its shine because it cooled off, but it looks very rich and chocolatey. So we're going to decorate it. I made some whipped cream earlier, just some heavy cream. I sweetened it with some sugar, and I usually use about 2 tablespoons or 1 tablespoon per cup of cream, and depending on how sweet you like it. And I also added a little bit of vanilla. And if you haven't whipped cream yet, heavy cream, I suggest trying it and kind of becoming comfortable with it, because it's definitely something that you're going to be doing a lot in the pastry kitchen. You should be very familiar with it, and you should feel very comfortable making a small batch of it. So go ahead and practice. If you don't have anything to serve the whipped cream with, you could serve it with some fresh berries, strawberries, or raspberries in a dish to your family and friends, or just eat it yourself. So let's go ahead and do a little bit of piping on our tart. So I'm just going to go around the edges of the tart, and I'm just going to make a border. And you can decorate the tart however you like with your cream. I'm going to be doing a border, and then I'm just going to put a little bit of cream in the center. So like I said, this is a crowd pleaser. It's an everybody dessert. It's got everybody flavors in it. Then I'm just going to do some piping in the middle. And like I said, you can decorate the tart however you like. And then we're going to be putting some raspberries on the tart. So I've got some raspberries that I held back from my filling. We're going to put a few of these, and then we're going to go ahead and cut it, and we're going to give it a try. Okay. Some of these, they can get a little bit soggy, so I'm kind of picking the best ones that I can. And fresh mint is always nice to have around the kitchen. So I've got some fresh mint that I put in a little bit of water to keep it looking fresh. And we'll be pinching off. I like to pinch off the tops so we get a few of the small leaves along with the kind of the medium ones too. And I'm just going to put a couple of these on here. They just freshen it up. They make it look a little bit more finished. And mint is something that you can grow easily. It grows like crazy once you plant it in your garden. And it's something that's kind of nice to have around, especially for doing desserts like these. So we'll go ahead and put another piece of mint on, and then we're ready to cut the tart. So I've got some warm water that I'm going to be dipping my knife into. And the French knife is perfect for cutting these tarts or things that have a crispy crust on them, because it can easily go through. So I'm going to warm up my knife in my warm water. I'm going to wipe it off with my towel. You don't want any water because the water will leave spots on your chocolate. And I have the blade away from my hand. Just be very careful that your towel is covering the blade so you're not going to cut yourself. And I'm just going to carefully go through the tart. You can feel when you've gone through the bottom of it. And then I'm just going to rinse this knife off and clean it off carefully. And remember, the blade is going out. And I'm just going to make another cut. And this is pretty rich, so I'm not cutting a very big piece. And it feels like it cut through perfectly. So now I've got a plate ready, and we're just going to put a little bit of chocolate sauce on the plate, or you could put raspberry sauce too. And I was just going to put some dotting around here. And the desserts that we're doing now compared to in the beginning, they have a lot more flavor to them. It's called layering. You're going to be tasting flavors in the beginning, and in the middle and in the end. So be mindful of that with your flavor descriptions for your assessments. We're going to be looking for descriptions on all of these different flavors. So the tart seems to be coming out just fine. Sometimes the first piece can be a little sketchy. Sometimes the tip gets a little bit stuck, but this one seemed to come out just fine. And you can kind of fix up the cream a little bit. And I thought it would be nice if we put a few of the raspberries on the plate too. Did we have a question?
Someone asked for plating. Should you plate a piece or the entire pie?
The question is, for the plating, should you plate a piece or the entire tart? Well, we'd like to see the entire tart. So, well, what I mean is we'd like to see the inside of the tart. So cutting a piece would be nice so we could see your work and how the shell turned out. And then you can easily present it on a plate too. So I have a cake stand here. And then I was just going to put the rest of the tart on the stand. So I'm going to need a little help picking this up. My spatula, or maybe not. I may have to slide it to the end. Yeah. So I have this on the bottom of the tart pan, which I baked it on. And I'm just going to slide it onto my cake plate. So if you don't have a cake plate, that's okay too. Any plate will work. So you can see the inside of the tart, and then we have the plate up too. So I was going to taste the tart too, and then we'll talk about some of the flavors in it. So it has a nice crisp crust. The first thing I'm tasting for sure is chocolate. And I feel the crispiness and the flakiness and the butteriness of the tart shell. So I'm tasting the chocolate first with the crispiness and all the texture and the smoothness of the chocolate. And then I'm tasting the raspberry. So that should help you in your flavor descriptions. Make sure that you're tasting your desserts. You don't have to eat all of it unless you want to. Just taste a little taste. So that's our assessment for the day. And I wanted to introduce you guys to something a little different today, some cordials. So I've got some under the table here. And cordials are after dinner drinks, and they're usually sweet drinks. And they just bring an end to an elegant meal, and they're also used a lot in baking and pastry. So I have a few cordials today. So I have some Kahlua, which is a coffee liqueur. And like I said, these are all high in sugar. They're very sweet. And we have a Frangelico, which is a hazelnut liqueur, and it's from Italy. And what's nice about these little cordials is, after dinner drinks, they all have a very cute little style of their own in their own bottle. And the most notable is the Chambord, which is the raspberry liqueur. And they recently changed the labeling to this belt. It was more of a crown in the past. And this is just a really elegant French raspberry liqueur. This is made with this is made with red and black raspberries, and it's also made with Madagascar vanilla and Moroccan citrus, and it's also made with cognac, which is distilled wine. And this is just really, it's a French favorite. It's ultra classic. It's been around for a very long time. This is said to have been presented to Louis XIV when he visited Chateau de Chambord in the Loire Valley of France, which was in the 17th century, 300 years ago. And I'm not saying that this Chambord is 300 years ago, but that's the historical significance of Chambord, and it's like the Escoffier method. It's withstood the test of time. And these cordials are wonderful for having for an after dinner drink, or you can even make kind of fun custom drinks with them. The French martini is made with Chambord, and also a raspberry margarita. And I also read that the Frangelico and the Chambord are mixed together for a peanut butter drink, and they're nice on their own or with coffees, and they're wonderful for making mousses or flavoring truffles or just sprinkling on your sponge cakes. And we have a question.
Will we use those to flavor our ganache?
The question is, will you use these to flavor your ganache? Absolutely. These are just wonderful for flavoring ganaches. You can put a little bit in your ganache, or you can cut back a little bit on your cream and add a little bit more for some extra flavor. So these are wonderful for using in the pastry kitchen, and we'll be talking about these more in the times in the casts to come. And you can serve these in little glasses, or they also have these little chocolate cups, and then you can eat the cup too. So with the raspberry Chambord, you can drop a little raspberry in the bottom of the cup, or even the hazelnut. You can put a hazelnut in the bottom of the cup, and then just go ahead and fill it up with the liqueur, and you can serve these to your friends. And they could have a little after dinner drink, and then they can eat their cup too. So we're getting ready to wrap up. So if anyone has any questions, please get them in at this time. And thank you for joining our cast today. And I wanted to thank everyone that joined in for the live chat, which was at 6 o'clock today, an hour before the cast. And we just talked about just a little bit of everything in baking and pastry, and I did a lot of the talking. So hope you can join in. Our next live chat will be the first Thursday of every month. So our next chat is going to be the first Thursday in May at 6 o'clock. Hope you can join us, and thanks for joining me today. Bye.